Hello and welcome to Know the Code Show. Today we're going to be talking about PHP namespacing, and this is episode number 1. Before I get into the namespacing, let me first tell you a little bit about the show format so that you're aware. Basically, what we're going to do is I'm going to go through the code challenges one by one and explain how the challenge works. Hold on just one second here. I think I have a little bit of playback occurring. Hold on one second. Sorry about this. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so just a little bit of fun with the first episode and trying to get everything worked out, right? Okay. What I'm going to do is go through all of the challenges one by one and explain everything in detail to you. Now, this is not the developer school. In the school itself, we're going to go into namespacing and any of the topics that we discuss in the show in great detail so that you know the code inside and out for the topic that we're discussing. Here, we just want to give you a quick look at some of the topics and how to use them. We'll talk about the when, why, and how, just to make sure that you fully understand, to give you that little bit of morsel so you can pull this into your workflow. If you have any questions that you'd like me to answer, what you want to do is go ahead and jot those down. You can put them into Crowdcast. And at the end of the show, I'll have a Q&A section. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to take a look at the first challenge. The very first challenge that we did was I gave you a starting plugin and I asked you to go ahead and install that plugin and activate it. What I wanted you to do then is take a look at what happens when you activate the plugin. So if we look at this code, the very first thing that's going to happen is PHP is going to load up all of the code. It's going to compile it. And when that compiling occurs, what happens? What did you discover? If we look at the code that I gave you in the sampler, you'll notice that there's no namespace on line number 1. We haven't gotten to that yet. On line 29, we have an action. And we have a prefix to our callback, and our callback function is down here on line 37. Down on line 43, we have a function. And if you know core, you know that core also has a function called get underscore the underscore title. So what happens when our plugin activates? If you said you get a fatal error, that's correct. That's exactly what happens. You get a fatal error because PHP cannot redeclare a function that has already been declared. All right, what does that mean? Let's take a look. And as soon as I find it here on my screen, sorry for moving around. This is nothing more than a little sandbox that I have loaded up so that I can load in all the plugins and show you by example. So let's come over here and let's go ahead and activate that first one. And notice, what did I get? I got a fatal error. Let me blow that up for you so you can see it a little bit more. There, we zoomed in. Fatal error, cannot redeclare get the title. It's been previously declared. What happens is PHP goes through and compiles all the functions, all the files that are being called. So when you go to activate this plugin, it goes through WordPress core loads first, right? Get the title is in the core, so it's already been pulled in and compiled. Okay. Now we get to the functions. I'm calling it again. It's not prefixed. It's just called get the title. Okay. So what happens is PHP then says, I can't do that. I'm not going to allow you to redefine. And if you were to look in the PHP manual, I'm going to go there right now and pull that up. And by the way, there'll be links for this in the final tutorial that's going to be posted, as well as everything that I'm talking about here today. If you look in the manual right here, it talks about that all functions and classes have global scope, right? That way you can call them from anywhere in your program. It also says PHP does not support function overloading, nor is it possible to undefine or redefine previously declared functions. We're going to ignore the overloading. We're going to ignore the undefined. We're going to go to that latter part. PHP does not support redefining previously declared functions. Therefore, basically what that's telling you is all your functions, all your classes have to have unique names. And that's why you see when you look in code, you'll see prefixes on code, right? Please excuse me a moment while I find where my code is. So if I looked at code, I would have a prefix. And you're used to seeing prefixes. If you use Genesis, there's a Genesis prefix. WordPress has a lot of WP underscore prefixes. Gravity Forms has theirs. All the different plugins have theirs. And you're using them in your themes and in any work that you're doing as well. If you're not, you're going to get a fatal error. So you're already doing it. You're probably putting, like my name would be in the front, I'd say Tanya underscore, and then whatever my function or class is, so that I'm giving it a unique name. That's prefixing. Today we're going to talk about namespacing, which eliminates the prefix and replaces it with a namespace. So let's move on. Hopefully you understood what I was just talking about. We're going to move on to question number 2. Okay. So in question number 2, I gave you some code, and here's the code right here. And I said, what happens? What happens when this code runs? Which one is going to fire? Get the title function. Is it going to be called from core, or is it going to be called from the plugin? The answer, from the plugin. Okay. So if we take a look at line number 1 on here, we have a namespace, right? Now this is something new. I know you've not probably seen it before, but basically this is where you're declaring the namespace for whatever is in this file. So it's per file. Everything that's below this is now going to have this unique naming to it, and it's called a namespace. So we're replacing the prefix with what we've declared up here. For me, I have know the code show / and then the episode and the question. The way that I use it in the callback is with a new constant called namespace, right? It's a magic constant. And now I'm able to call my function that is within this plugin and within that namespaced file. So the function that I have is demonstrate namespacing. When that fires, it's now going to echo out, get the title. The way PHP works, and this is a clue for you, is it has an order that it follows when it's trying to look up what functions that it needs to then pull in and execute, right, and evaluate. That evaluation order follows the name resolution rules. There'll be a link for this, but let's go and take a look at it now. So I'm going to get rid of that. Here is, if I scroll to the top, name resolution rules. It is in the PHP manual. You can easily search for it. And it goes through and it gives you a whole list of rules. We're not going to go through this in great detail. But suffice it to say, what it does is it first looks to see for a full qualified name. So for that full qualified function, it's going to look for that one first. So if I was to use an example of foo and a forward slash get the title, it's going to go and pull that in because it says, okay, that's the one that you want. The next thing it's going to look at is, okay, I didn't find one of those, so now I'm going to look for the current namespace. Okay, I didn't find it in the current namespace, then I'm going to go to the global namespace, and I'm going to look there. All right, so that's how that works. Let's go back to our code. First thing it looks for is fully qualified function naming. Up here, we have that when we're calling the callback itself because we have namespace, and then we have the name of the function. So it knows how to go and pull this particular function. That's the first thing that it did. For the next function, the one that we're trying to execute, get the title, when I call it here, the very first place it's going to look, it's going to go, is it fully qualified function? No. Next, current namespace. Yes. It looks and it goes boing right here on line 36. I have it right there in my namespace. So it's going to call that one. It's not going to call core because it found it in my namespace. So it's going to return the namespace. Does that make sense to you? I hope so. So let's go and take a look. And what I want to do, I'm going to go and zoom back out again so I can see this. And this time I'm going to activate the second question or the second plugin that I gave you. And I'm just going to run this. And you see what it did there was it echoed out the full namespace here. See it right here? There it is. And that's all that I asked it to do, right? When I looked at the code, I just asked it to just do that. Here, I just said, return that and then echo it. Okay, so that's how we know that it's going to call the function is you're going to look within that namespace and see if it's there. I hope that didn't trip you up too much. Let's move on. Question number 3. How else can you call get the title? Oh, I'm sorry, not get the title. How else can you call this callback demonstrate underscore namespacing besides using the magic constant? How else can I do that? If you remember what I said back in the rules, the first thing it looks for is a fully qualified path to that function. So it makes sense then that I can replace namespace, right, with the full path. So if I went and grabbed copy and I get rid of this and I put this in here, just like that. That's how I can also do this. It's a bit cumbersome, isn't it? Yeah, it looks kind of ugly, but you can call it just like that. You don't have to use the magic constant. You can call it directly by putting in the entire path, and now it's going to call that particular callback function. It's exactly the same. And matter of fact, namespace magic constant will actually break down to equal this particular string. So it's just a shortcut for you. It looks cleaner, it looks better, but you can certainly call it just like this to be very verbose. And I'm going to go ahead and put that back. All right. Let's move on. I hope that you understood that one too. And if not, we'll talk about it in the Q&A section. Just go ahead and put your questions up there. You always want to remember, I just want to give you a quick tip. You always want to remember with any callbacks, which with add function or add action and apply any of your filters. So if you have an add filter, this is the hook tag name right here. The second part is your callback. So therefore, you have to put it in as a fully qualified function, or if you're calling one off of a class, then it's got to be fully qualified to that class as well, to be able to get to the method. But here we're just going to talk about just functions themselves. So it has to know the full path. So I could not go in, if I got rid of this, and I just try to call demonstrate namespacing, this is sitting within a namespace. And when this gets executed back in core, where this is going to be fired, it doesn't know about the namespace. It's not sitting in the same namespace, so therefore it will not fire it. It doesn't know where to call it from, and you're going to get an error. So therefore, make sure when you're using namespaces that you do it as a fully qualified namespace. Okay? Quick tip for you. And it's in a big blue box in the tutorial, so if you forget, it's going to be right there for you. Let's move on to question number 4. In question number 4, I asked you, this is actually our code challenge too, so if I come back over to here and I'm going to scroll down to Q4, how else can I call get the title from the plugin? I'm not worried about core. I'm talking about the one I have in the plugin. How else can I call that? Okay. There are actually 3 different ways. And depending upon how you want to do it, I'll give you best practice, but there are 3 different ways to do it. And any of these answers that you gave me are perfectly fine. Any way that you wanted to do it. So what I want to do is I'm going to open back up the code again, and I'm going to show it to you. And I hope you can see this. Let's take a look at where get the title moved to within the plugin. So it moved to its own file called title.php, and it was in a support folder. And in that folder, what we have is the namespace for the original root, right? So know the code show, and then / and the episode and the question, that's all still there. So it's all still in the same package. And then there's another sub namespace called support. And you notice support matches up with the folder. There's a best practice for you. Try to keep everything namespaced to match up with how you're organizing your code. All right. So we want to be able to call this particular function from our main plugin. And to be able to do that, you notice that we are not in the same namespace, right? Because that's a sub namespace. It's got its own package. So I couldn't just call get the title from my plugin, because I'm going to get the one from core. I'm not going to get the one that's in the sub namespace. So how do I get that? I've got to be specific. I've got to give the full qualified path so that it knows, PHP knows how to go and pull that in. Method number 1 is all I have to do is declare the sub namespace, because it already knows the current namespace, right? So all I have to do is declare the sub namespace, since it's sitting in the same one, same root, which I have here. So that's what I did. Method number 1 is support / get the title. It will now call it. And I'll show you here in a moment that, yeah, it does. Method number 2 is, let's be verbose here. Let's call the entire qualified namespace plus the function. When you do that, though, because it's sitting in this namespace, you've got to put a / in the very beginning of it. Else it's going to go and append, or I'm sorry, put the prefix of the current namespace. So you'd end up with know the code show / episode, blah, 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 / know the code show. See, doesn't work. So put the / and / in the front of it, and now it's going to call the right one. The third method, And I'm only showing you this method so that you know how to use it when you want to call in a package that's external to your plugin. And I'm going to show you an example of that because I do this all the time with the plugins that we're using here on the club, and you'll be learning about it as well. So method number 3 is we're going to come up with a new keyword, which is called use. I call out the entire namespace, right? And because this sits in the same namespace and I'm not calling out let me retract that. Because I'm trying to get at all the functions within there, I have to use a word as and then assign it a name. If I were calling a class, I don't need the as. I can just append this with, let's say I have a class. My class. Well, I don't know why that went to caps. It's my typing. And then I wouldn't need this. I can go like that. And it pulls that in, and now I can use my class. If I wanted, oh, here's another one. If I wanted to use query, you can just do a use query, and now it's pulled into this namespace, and I'm able to use it. Okay? I don't have to put a forward slash or anything in front to be able to use it. I just use it just like this. So let's put this back. Now let's scroll down. Now notice I assigned it a name title, and you can do this even with a class too. And I'll show you that when I set it up and show you some of the stuff that's up on GitHub. So if I come down here with method number 3, I am using that naming that I just gave it, a forward slash, and get the title. So all 3 of these are going to work. And if I come over here to the code, or to my sandbox project, I'm going to deactivate that one. And I'm now going to activate the 4th one. And if I refresh this, look at this. Method number 1, method number 2, method number 3. All 3 of them work. Is that clear as mud? All right. So that concludes all of the questions that we went through for this particular code challenge and for learning about namespacing in a bite-sized nibble, if you will. I told you that I would show you some code here on GitHub. And matter of fact, if I come back over here to the questions, which we are now starting the QA portion, Laura asked me a question, so I would like to answer that here real quick for you. And she wanted to know about how I use namespacing. I use namespacing for everything that I do. I don't prefix. I use namespacing. I find it packages everything that I'm working on so that I can then use that same packaging. I can pull in that file into any project that I want. And as I start teaching you about dry, single responsibility, those types of things, you're going to learn how to divvy up your code into files so that everything within that file supports whatever that file is doing. But let's take a look at some of my code. And I'll show you an example here real quick. Just bear with me. This is one I did yesterday. It gets that little typed out messages on the screen on the home page. I don't know if you saw that yet or not. But I needed to use, you can see here's the namespace, typed features. And I needed to use a class that I have in the core plugin, which is in shortcodes. So all that I did was I did use. I pulled in the entire path to that class. I assigned it to shortcode. So now I have a name that I want. I wanted it to be a unique name. And then when I come down and let's see if I can find it. It's always fun when you try to do it on the air, right? Here it is right here at the bottom. Zoom in so you can see it. So when I instantiate it, it knows exactly the path to go get that. So that's how I use them in every plugin, every theme. If you look in the themes that are there on GitHub, I namespace everything. And I think that everybody should be learning. Matter of fact, all the engineers and techs that I've taught over the years, that's how I've taught them how to do their coding and packaging is with namespacing. Another question that's been voted up here is namespacing is not common in the WP community. That is true. And when you look at the code is prefixed. It is not namespaced. Am I concerned about the future developers who don't understand namespacing, who may hesitate to use it in their projects? No, I'm not concerned about that. We're learning it here. We'll be writing about it. And when you get into the programs in dev school, you're going to write everything using namespaces. So you're going to learn the proper way of software development. Not that using prefixes is improper. However, it's a best practice and well known in any other language, any other platform that you go to as you're writing software to use namespacing and package up your software in that way. So therefore, that's the way it's going to be taught here in the club and in the school. And then Marcy, I know that you had a question too about the different ways in question number 4 to call the namespace. And yeah, you did get one of them right when you submitted your challenge. And I showed you the 2 other ways. I hope that that answered your question as we went through on in the program itself. All right, I think that answers everything here today. I hope that you guys were able to learn something new. If there are any other questions, you can post them here or in our Slack channel or in the comments, and I'll answer them there as well. Thank you so much. Everybody have a wonderful day.